couple of housekeeping rules. Um, First off, I just want to say a big thank you to Janik. Thank you so much, Brian and Maggie, for joining us and hosting this amazing webinar today. It is going to be a full hour webinar, DBPR approved course for the OPP Continued Education Credit for our Community Association Managers. If you are a Community Association Manager, if you did not leave your CAM license number in the registration, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. We just want to make sure that you get your certificate. Once you fully complete the course, we do need you to stay on for the full hour of the course to receive that credit. Janik will go ahead and be sending your certificate. Please give them at least 2 weeks to get that filed with DBPR, and then we will go ahead and um, have them send that directly to your email that you registered with. Okay. Um, we had a couple more hop on, but I think we are good to go. Maggie, Brian, if you want to go ahead and take it over, thank you guys so much again and enjoy the presentation.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, first of all, to Vesta for having us. We're excited to be here, and we'll be presenting on construction defects, handling issues throughout the life of your association. My name is Brian Crevasse. I'm a partner here at Janik, and I have with me today Maggie from my office, who's our amazing marketing person, and she's going to help me with the slideshow as well. Um, Before we get going, if there are questions during the presentation or comments or whatever, you're welcome to put them in the chat. Or if you want to just ask, that's fine too. I don't mind questions. I don't necessarily want it to be just me talking for an hour, although if that's what it is, that's fine as well. So let me just tell you a little bit about Janik and who we are. So we are a construction defect and insurance recovery law practice. At this point, we have over $1.25 billion in recoveries. We've got 60 plus attorneys and paralegals, and we have offices in Orlando, Miami, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, and Sarasota. And we are continuing to grow and spread throughout the state. We represent owners and associations, and especially townhome and condominium association owners in construction defect litigation. That's all we do. We try to be the best at it, and we have done a lot of good work for our clients throughout the state in terms of recoveries and everything else. So with that, we'll get into it. And the next slide is going to kind of lay out where things are going to go. What is a construction defect? I'm going to give you a definition. We'll talk about the impact, and then we'll talk about whose responsibility is it. So the next slide, the definition of a defect is just a deficiency arising out of the design, specification, surveying, planning, supervision, observation of construction or construction, repair, alteration, remodeling, real property resulting from. And we'll get into that in a minute. But for the most part, in layman's terms, a defect is just a failure by someone along the way in the process to either design or construct the building or a portion of the building in the proper manner. So you can have defective materials. A lot of people think of like the Chinese drywall or polybutylene plumbing from when I first started doing this way back in the day. You can have defective materials or products or components. So something that gets put into the building that is, not going to work from the start. You can also have a violation of applicable codes in effect at the time of construction or remodeling or repair, which can give rise to a specific cause of action pursuant to Chapter 553. 553 is a law that we have in Florida that says contractors have to follow the building code when building things. And the building code in Florida is very well defined. It's very well known. And basically what it says is the contractor has to build in accordance with the plans and specifications that are the permitted set submitted to and approved by the building department. They have to install all the materials that they use, whether it's windows or siding or roofing, in accordance with the plans and in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions. So each different, I guess, component of the building, like a perfect example would be like hardy board siding. There is very detailed instructions on how that's supposed to be put in and integrated with the other elements of the building envelope. And if you don't follow those installation instructions, you're probably violating the plans and the code. Um, and then, there's also can be issues with the design. So something from the very beginning, the architect or engineer who designed the project either didn't detail something properly or, didn't account for, some issue in the construction in the way that they should have. And then finally, just failure to construct in accordance with the accepted trade standards and good and workmanlike construction at the time of construction. So beyond following the plans, following the code, and following the installation instructions, there's also industry-wide accepted standards. Like, for example, with stucco, you'll hear a lot about ASTM standards. There's ASTM standards that apply to other components of the building as well, and they are basically uh, accepted in the industry as providing sort of the minimum standard that you should construct something to and that you should follow. So next slide. So in Florida, to sue under Chapter 553, there has to be a material code violation. Um, most of our engineers and experts say there's no such thing as an immaterial code violation, meaning if it doesn't follow the building code, it's obviously a material violation. That's because they put it in the code for a reason. But a material code violation is a violation that exists within a completed building structure or facility, which may reasonably result or has resulted in physical harm to a person or significant damage to the performance of a building or its systems. So that is in the building code. And what that means is, there's some code violation that is impacting the performance of the building or, has caused some sort of physical harm to a person. So obviously, a building collapse would be an example of like a physical harm that might be caused. But there can also be, much, much less significant issues that can still be incredibly expensive to repair and it can cause tons of damage. For example, if you have an issue with the way the roof is integrated with the adjoining walls and it's directing water into the building and behind the building envelope, you can get significant rotting of wood framing. You can get all kinds of other issues associated with water being in places where it's not supposed to be. So go to the next slide. So what is the impact? What is an impact? It can be property damage. That could be, something like, I'm trying to think of a good property, just straight property damage where it's not hitting the building. Like if you had a tile roof per se, and the tiles weren't properly attached, and I actually had a case where this happened, and a storm comes along, a summer storm, and starts blowing tiles off the roof, and they start landing on cars. Obviously you've got property damage there. Some other things are getting damaged, but there can also be property damage where one scope of work damages another. So that would be like a leaking roof is going to damage the wood framing or the wood sheathing, or a leaking window might cause damage to the interior portions of the unit around the window, et cetera, et cetera. So there can also be the other impacts can be premature deterioration of building systems. So obviously the framing and the stucco on the building are intended to be, you know, lifetime systems, right? You typically don't think of maintenance where like, oh, I've got to go change out the framing on my house, or I got to replace all my stucco because it's been on there for 10 years. But what can happen is if water is getting, behind stucco or in an area where it's not supposed to be, it can cause the stucco to crack. It can cause the stucco to delaminate, or it can cause it to, even spall and completely fall off the building. So that's premature deterioration. That kind of goes along with diminished useful life. Obviously, increased maintenance costs if you're having nonstop roof leaks, or you've got tons of cracked stucco and you're constantly having to route the cracks and paint and do that. It can increase maintenance costs, premature capital improvements, so roof that's not put in correctly, and then you've got to replace your roof every 10 years instead of every 20. Life safety issues, that can be balcony railings is a big one that we see with life safety. We have had not many, but definitely more than you would think projects over the years where either balconies had to be completely closed to occupants because of life safety issues with balcony railings or water intrusion that's caused damage to the balconies. Or even in some cases, we have had entire buildings be red tagged by the building department. So obviously, that can be a major problem for the association and for the owners. Um, Member owner complaints, overall reduction in beauty and enjoyment of the community, and special assessments to cover repairs. So next up is responsibility. So who are we when we're representing an association and you're working um, on behalf of an association? Who is the association going to be trying to pursue? So it can be anyone from the developer, the general contractor. Obviously, the general contractor is almost always a party because they're the ones that built the building. Individual qualifier, that's the license holder for the contractor. There may be reasons why we want to sue that person individually, and we assess that on a case by case basis depending on involvement or lack of involvement. It's important to remember that the general contractor and that qualifier, when they go and pull a permit, they are telling the building department, we are going to make sure that this building is built in accordance with the code and in accordance with the approved plans and specifications that we submitted to you, building department. And they cannot just shirk that responsibility by subbing all of the work out to others. They're on the hook for whatever the finished product is. So next, you're going to have architect, engineers, surveyors. It depends on the types of defects. Um, but obviously, there can be issues with the design, and the contractor can say, hey, I built it exactly how it was designed and it's not working. And the reason that is because there's a design defect. We will typically sue subcontractors directly. So, as you guys probably know, most general contractors do not self perform their own work. It's very rare these days to see a general contractor that does their own work. Much of the work that they do, they subcontract out to other people like that are trade, electricians, plumbers, roofers, companies that only install windows, companies that only install different elements of the facade. So, there's any construction defect case, there's going to be a lot of different parties. We could go after a material supplier if the real issue is the way the materials were manufactured. That is more rare. There are manufacturing defects from time to time, but I would say, most of the time, the products that they're using have been well tested and used over time. And so a lot of the issues with, materials just doesn't happen as much anymore as it some of these materials first came out. Like I mentioned, hardy board. They had a lot of problems with hardy board when it first was released in terms of what it was made out of and how it's performing. Well, now 20 years later, 25 years later, they've really worked a lot of those kinks out, and you see that with a lot of different material suppliers. However, there can still be issues, and then if that's the case, we would go after the supplier and the manufacturer of those products. So we can go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about latent versus patent construction defects. So patent just means you can see it with your own eyes. You don't have to do any testing. You potentially don't have to be an engineer to recognize it. And so a patent defect is going to be one where it's just open and obvious. If you see a massive crack in a wall like this guy's looking at, or um, you know, your roof leaks every time it rains, that is probably all a patent defect. Now, you may not know why the crack is there. The reason why it is there may be latent. The reason why the roof is leaking may be latent, but the knowledge of the issue, like, for example, There's actually a Florida case that came out that said, hey, a patent, everyone knows that a brand new roof is not supposed to leak, all the time when it's raining. And so at a certain point, if you get a brand new roof and it's leaking, you're on notice that there's potentially a construction defect, and that defect is a patent defect, versus a latent defect, which is going to be a defect that you may not be able to recognize, or you would not be able to recognize without doing some additional testing or at least getting a professional involved. So, like when you're looking at a building, you're essentially looking at the outside skin of the onion, right? And so you're only seeing a limited view of kind of what all could be going on with the building envelope or with other components of the building. And so, but there could be things that you're not able to see without performing destructive testing or investigatory testing, where you open up, peel back some of the layers to see how everything is performing. Like the big crack we saw in the prior picture, that's probably patent, but a lot of times there will be very minor cracking that is indicative of issues with the stucco, or water getting trapped behind the stucco and trying to get out. But that's typically considered to be a latent defect. You can also have, latent defects associated with, your MEP systems. That's going to be like your air conditioning, electrical, fire protection, plumbing. Um, we see, lots and lots of HVAC issues in Florida over the years doing this. Um, Glazing systems, that's windows and doors. Post tension systems, that's going to be like on mid to high rise condominium buildings, or yeah, pretty much always condominium buildings or any kind of tall building. A lot of times they are put together using post tension cables. The balconies are supported by post tension cables and things like that. Obviously, those things get covered in concrete. The windows, when they get put in, you can't see how they're necessarily installed because they're surrounded with trim. Waterproofing of the building, beneath the stucco, beneath the balconies, you're not gonna be able to see that unless you open it up. So those are all kind of common latent defects. Um, and the next slide will kind of talk about the common stucco defects that you may notice in your communities. You can have stucco that has an insufficient thickness. So there's a standard that says how thick the stucco needs to be put on, an ASTM standard. And a lot of the local building codes actually also now address this issue because it was such a problem in Florida. So if it's too thin, that's a problem because it will crack and flake off. If it's too thick, that can be a problem because it can have more weight than it can be than whatever is supporting it, whether it's on a concrete block wall or if it's on wood framing, you're going to have like a metal mesh or lath behind the stucco that holds it on. So that can be an issue. And other issues you can have with stucco is improper control joints. So a lot of times this is like a lot of the builders will say, well, yeah, stucco is just concrete and all concrete cracks. Like everybody knows that. Like, so of course, it cracks. But, and there is going to be some cracking with stucco and with any kind of concrete because of expansion and contraction. Gets hot, gets cold, and the materials expand. But you can actually control that cracking by using what they call control joints. You probably see this in your driveway, where every 10 feet or so there's a saw cut, you know, crack, I guess, or a joint across your driveway. Well, that's so that when the concrete expands and contracts, there's room for it to move. So there's actually specific standards when it comes to stucco about where those control joints need to be and how many of them there need to be. And unfortunately, they typically are not followed. And then you can end up with lots of cracking. Cracking can allow water to get in behind the stucco and trapped. So lots of issues there. Another common stucco defect is just inadequate flashing. they don't waterproof behind the stucco at the places where they need to do that appropriately. They don't provide the appropriate weep screeds. So a lot of stucco systems are designed to be, to manage the water by allowing any water that gets behind it to flow out. They'll either seal the weep screeds or not put them in at all, and then you get water trapped behind your stucco. And if you have wood there, it's going to rot. And even if you don't have wood, if water is trapped behind the stucco, water always tries to find a way out. And a lot of times the way that it's going to get out is by causing the stucco to crack. And or you'll start sometimes you'll even just see like efflorescence, like a salts building up on the outside of the stucco. So lots of things that can go wrong with stucco, especially here in Florida where we have a lot of rain. So here we're looking at some pictures of, some where some stucco has been removed to show, kind of what is behind it. And in this case, there you can tell that there's been some water intrusion at this location. And then this other picture to the right, um, this is on like a stucco over block or stucco over concrete, bigger building, but you can actually see that the stucco is delaminating and cracking and, not performing as it is supposed to. Um, so we can go to the next one. This pool deck waterproofing issues. It's another, issue that we see fairly often. This is going to be a lot of times again on like a mid-rise, high-rise type situation. It's not necessarily going to be a problem if you've got a community with, a bunch of two-story townhomes and a community pool. But anytime you're creating sort of a pool deck or a balcony deck, and it's above some other portion of the structure, you've got to do a really good job of waterproofing those things and integrating them with the building envelope. Otherwise, you can be setting yourselves up for, failures of the waterproofing, structural issues. We've had pool decks that had to be shored from, the garage below because of the amount of um, damage that had been done to the concrete adjacent to the pool. And then you can just get general deterioration of concrete and stuff around it as well. Um, Go to another picture and just show you some of the pool deck issues. Like this is on the left. Um, you can just kind of see it looks like obviously there's been some water damage there. And then on the right, this is below the pool. So you're getting issues where the pool deck wasn't properly waterproofed. Now you're getting water that's getting trapped into your garage. And over time, the amount of water can actually start to impact the structural integrity of the concrete and the block. So, these are major issues to be on the lookout for if you are handling those types of buildings. If you're not, really most of your defects are going to be typically in the building envelope, although we see a lot of site work issues too lately. But a lot of like stucco, windows that leak, roofs that leak, evidence of water damage really anywhere on the envelope. And that can be major problems. The next thing is MEP issues. So these are looks like electrical boxes and things like that weren't properly coated. We see this a lot with not necessarily waterfront, but near to the ocean, near to the water, type mid and high rise condominium buildings. Obviously, you're in a corrosive environment. There's code requirements that depending on how close you are to the shore and industry standards, that you need to use certain types of materials. And a lot of times those materials are significantly more expensive, so they don't use them. And I see I've got a question. So I'll come back to that one in just a second. But you can have pretty significant issues with just them using the wrong materials. And then the next slide, the other thing that you will see a lot is the HVAC system in your buildings and in your homes should be a positive pressurization, meaning that when your AC runs, you are positive to the outside, not sucking outside air into your home. And why is that so important in Florida? Well, obviously we all know that you don't want to be sucking hot, humid air into your home and into your attic and into your walls, um, because what's going to happen at night when that hot, humid air cools, well, it's going to condensate, and then you're basically getting water in all kinds of places where it shouldn't be. So that's another, kind of typical MEP issue that we see, along with, HVAC systems that are sometimes more in the townhome context, than in the tower context. But we see a lot of HVAC systems that are actually oversized or not properly installed. And that can actually cause problems too, because if your air conditioning doesn't run enough or for long enough, it doesn't take the moisture out of the air, and you can have mold and humidity issues on the inside. Um, and then also we see a lot in the bigger buildings issues with cooling tower systems. Um, again, you can see corrosion, and these are either materials that weren't properly um, specified, meaning they should have called for something else, or they went with a material that they shouldn't have for that particular location. So I'm going to jump back. I'm sorry I didn't see the question earlier. Um, so someone said, we're beginning a painting process, have stucco cracks that painter will caulk and seal before painting. What's your opinion? Sorry. What's your opinion on gutter responsibility to reduce cracking, water intrusion? What's your opinion on gutter responsibility to reduce cracking and water intrusion? Builder put gutters on front and back, but not sides. Thank you. So, well, one, if you're seeing stucco cracks, that is something that, um, you want to have somebody look at, because while there should be some cracking, if you've got extensive cracking, it could actually be a sign of a bigger problem. And you're going to want to have either, an architect, engineer, contractor, or you can call us and we can get someone to come take a look. Take a look and say, hey, is this a normal amount of cracking that you would expect to see of a building that's this age? Or is this above and beyond that? And if it's above and beyond that, you want to find out what's causing it. Because if you just caulk it and seal it and paint it, but there's an underlying issue where water is getting in behind the stucco and that's what's caused it to crack, all you're really doing is just sealing the water in even worse than it is right now. And then in terms of gutters, our experts actually vary somewhat on how they view the responsibility for gutters. We have one engineer that believes that it is a code violation not to have gutters on every building in Florida, because it's just an improper water management system for the building. Like, one of the things that they have to do under the code is to basically manage the water in and around building and the building envelope. And that particular expert believes that failing to put gutters all the way around with drains that actually don't just dump into the yard but drain out away from the building, is an issue. We have other engineers that think it's less of an issue. That if the building is constructed correctly, you don't necessarily need gutters on all four sides. So it probably just depends on that one, on which engineer you ask, but it definitely could be a significant issue. And if you're having significant stucco cracking, I would definitely get somebody to go and take a look at why you're getting those issues. Um, all right, and go to the next slide. These are just all different types of MEP issues. So these are pressure reducing valves that are failing, and you can tell by the corrosion that's going on there. And then the next slide is kind of, I think, just showing that it's not actually doing the pressure reducing that it's supposed to be doing, probably because the valve is failing. You can also have different missing fittings. So that can be the next slide. And then more common that what we see is the next slide, which is shower pan issues in big high-rise and mid-rise condominium buildings, but also in your typical single-family home and associations too. I don't know how many people of you guys know who have like gone to redo their shower only to find out that the shower pan, you start taking the tile off or there's a soft spot in your shower or whatever, and it's because they didn't put the shower pan in correctly. Well, in a condominium building, they actually are responsible for that portion of the building. And, if you multiply that out times hundreds of units, it can be one, a significant issue in terms of the cost to repair it. And it can also cause significant damage to the building, depending on what the materials around the shower pan are, or just an annoyance where you're getting every time your upstairs neighbor takes a shower, you're getting a wet spot on your roof, which will eventually become a major problem. We can go to the next slide. This is just showing, you can see that there's been some water deterioration there beneath where some of the tile's been removed, um, and that there's moisture there, obviously, that should not be there. And then the next slide, these are all from a high rise in Miami, where they had just significant issues with the shower pan, significant leaking. And you can see there's even like cracking of the substrate there. And again, anytime water gets anywhere, it's going to cause damage. That's why you have to manage where it goes and how it gets out of the building, um, in terms of really all aspects of it with the envelope and on when it's on the inside, because water over time will destroy wood and can seriously damage concrete and other materials as well. So a lot of times people think, well, it's concrete, it's waterproof. That's not necessarily the case. Concrete can be weakened over time by enough water. Um, the next slide. Here you can see water was detected under the shower pan. There's a little like pink paper there. That's like a litmus paper that our experts use to look for water where it's not supposed to be. So in this case, they're doing with the shower pan. And a lot of times you'll see them doing this when they do window testing on our buildings. So they will have one person on the outside spraying the outside of the window with a nozzle, and that nozzle's like a certain pressure that's when you're doing window testing, it's specified by the industry. So it's not like they're pressure washing the windows or something like that. It's a nozzle designed to put the right amount of pressure on that's the window should be able to stand up against. And you'll see them standing on the inside with this little pink paper at different portions around the window. And unfortunately, not always, but many times the windows will leak and you'll have signs of water intrusion just from, not too much pressure. It's just the windows were not properly installed. So um, here we go. And now we're getting into windows. So windows are a significant issue, whatever the construction. These pictures deal with some high-rise construction, but even in your two-story standard townhomes like we mostly have around Orlando, um, the windows tend to have significant issues with the way they're installed. Um, they're using builder grade windows, which aren't necessarily like the best, but if put in correctly, they shouldn't leak. But there's a whole system around that window that includes flashing, different layers of sealants. This is showing obviously a different type of window where you've got a secondary sealant, a primary sealant, and then grout. But the installation of the sealant around the windows and the integration of the windows with the flashing is a huge problem that we see on almost every one of our projects, where the people installing the components adjacent to the windows and the people installing the windows are not getting on the same page and getting the windows properly integrated with the other portions of the building envelope. And when you're dealing with a building envelope, if you have, waterproofing that's reverse lapped, if you're missing sealants, if you don't leave room for the sealants around the windows, we see that very commonly. They'll run the stucco right up to the edge of the window. There's no room to put a sealant there, and so they just don't put a sealant there. As we talked about earlier, the stucco expands and contracts. Then you get a crack there. You don't have a piece of sealant there. It's not, the window isn't designed to have water coming in there, and you will have significant leaking adjacent to your windows. Um, we can go to the next one.
Brian, are you okay with answering a question?
Of course, I just didn't see it. So yeah, anytime there's a
That's
question,
okay.
just let me know.
I
Um,
got you.
so the question is, so what if it comes down to is a proper installation, waterproofing, and proper materials, as well as proper inspection? What measure to put into place to make sure business and builders are doing things correctly? Because most things you don't see until the damage is done. That's a great question. And I get that question probably from every single client that we've ever had, which is, how could this have gotten past the inspections of the building department? So, um, you know, the answer is that the building inspector gets called out to do the inspections on your building by the contractor when the contractor is ready for them to come and look. And the building departments are only looking at very certain things. Typically with wood frame, they're looking at, how is the framing done? Did they use the proper connections? Did they use the right nails? Do they have the hurricane clips there, etc.? They are not typically looking to say, is the building envelope integrated correctly? And a lot of times they wouldn't even be able to tell that depending on the phase of the construction. So as we talked about earlier, lots of the components of the building actually get covered up as the contractor moves along. So it might be that the building department comes out, they do their inspection, they pass that particular thing, they get called back out to do an inspection of a different component 2 months later, and everything that's happened in between is really covered up, what they would even be able to see if they were looking at it to begin with, which they're typically not. The other thing is, like, and this kind of varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but like there are jurisdictions in Florida that have deposed the building department and or talked to the building inspectors. Like, they do roof inspections, right? They're going to do a roof inspection on every building. There are places they're not allowed to get on the roof. So they're inspecting the roof from the ground floor. So the building department is really, they are there to catch like the most obvious and egregious things, and they are not really looking at the way the systems in the building are coming together and interacting with each other, which is most of our cases deal with water intrusion. We have lots of other issues we deal with too, but that's the majority have some kind of water intrusion issues. And you know that's kind of what it is. So you can't really count on the building department. So who is responsible? So some people think, well, what about the architect or the engineer? But a lot of times they don't have any responsibility beyond the time that they do their plans. So sometimes they will be hired to do construction inspections or construction administration services during the project. And they will come out and look at things and say, hey, is this being done in accordance with my plans? But I would say that's the exception. It's definitely not the rule. And then, so who does it come back to? Well, the general contractor, when they go and pull that permit, they are saying, and when they take the license and qualify the entity, they are saying, we will oversee this project. We're not going to just put our name on it. We're not just going to pull the permit and walk away. So in Florida, many of the courts have ruled that the general contractor has what's called a non-delegable duty, meaning they can't just shirk all of their responsibility off onto the subcontractors. They have to be responsible to oversee the work of their subs, to make sure that their subcontractors are following the plans, to make sure they're doing things correctly. And that's who's supposed to be watching the work. Unfortunately, there are a lot of general contractors that just rely on the subcontractors to do their work. They don't check it, they don't watch it carefully, they don't make sure that the two different trades, like the stucco sub and the window installation sub, are bringing their work together in the way that they're supposed to. So I know that's not really a great answer to your question, but I think the question really, the answer is really, it should be the general contractor, um, along with anyone else who's involved in inspecting the work. But unfortunately, typically there's nobody that's actually watching nearly as closely as they should. Um, Next, can a bathroom exhaust vent be vented into an attic that is vented or that has exhaust vents? That one I am not 100% sure of. I know you can't vent a bathroom exhaust straight into an attic that is not vented. I don't know if you can vent it into one that is vented. I would think that would not be a best practice because you're putting potentially a ton of moisture, humidity into the attic. But I will ask my engineer that one, and hopefully the next time I get asked that question, I know the answer. I'm not 100% sure if that's code or not code.
And Latanya just said, thank you. I always wonder how certain things make it through. I'm no builder, contractor, or inspector, but just to the general eye, some things just look wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever watched some of these projects go up. They're building a townhome project right now across from where my daughter goes to school, and my son goes to school there too. So I'm there pretty often. And like a month ago, they were doing the site work, and then I was there this week, and they must have put up like 20 buildings in a month. I mean, they're not done, but they're framed. They're starting to get the roofs on, and like they make their money by getting these projects from approval to sales as quickly as possible. And so sometimes haste makes waste. That old saying, but sometimes, doing things too fast and not making sure they're done right can cause a lot of problems. And to some extent, like the contractors, they just honestly don't care that much to make sure that they're doing a great job because they have insurance and their subcontractors have insurance. And so they are not ultimately thinking that they're going to be financially responsible for whatever happens, and whatever happens is down the road. And what they care about is making money now. So, um, perfect. All right. And then let's go to the glazing systems. When you're looking at windows, so you can just see they're testing this window. When they do high-rise tests, they'll build pressure chambers on the outside, which is probably some of what you're seeing, or on the inside. And what that does, it recreates the pressure that the window is designed to withstand, either by the manufacturer or the architect or engineer who specified it. And um, so what you're just seeing is that at the design pressures, meaning not something that's beyond what the window should be capable of withstanding. There's just water pouring into the interior portion of the building. And then the next slide is really just going to show you kind of like how we do that testing, but on a sliding glass door. As you can see, we kind of build like a rack, and then that's like a clear plastic, and then they use a machine to like create the design pressures. And again, a lot of issues with sliding glass doors and balconies. And it's not typically, I mean, it can be the product, but it's typically the installation of the product. The next thing is that we're going to talk about is railing systems. So railing systems, it can really depend on the type of construction, but this is a railing system that's on a concrete deck, but we also see railing systems on wood construction balconies. Either way, it's critical. Um, Either way, it's critical to make sure that the railing system is installed in a way that it's not going to damage the balcony, that the balcony is sloped to direct water away from the building and not have water ponding on it, because when water's sitting on there, you're going to have significant long-term issues. And then obviously if it's wood and you've got water sitting on it, it will rot. I mean, I had a big apartment case. This was actually up in Tennessee, but we've had it in Florida too. Um, where the balconies all got red tagged because when our engineer went up there to start testing, there was ponded water on the balconies, and the balcony railings actually felt somewhat loose, like you kind of move them with your hand. Obviously, if you ever see that, that's a terrible sign. Um, and when we opened up those balconies, the wood was completely rotten. They had to shore up all of the balconies with emergency shoring, and basically lock all of their residents off from their balconies so that they couldn't access them until they made the repairs. So, railing systems can also be a contributor to water intrusion because if they pierce the waterproofing of the balcony and they don't reseal it correctly, that can also cause major problems. Post tension cables. This is one you're going to see on typically mid and high rise buildings. I've seen them on buildings as low as like maybe 5 or 6 stories. But your average 2-story townhome's not going to have a post tension system. Post tension cables are basically like a engineering way of supporting portions of the building. They typically run through the concrete. They have to be installed correctly or they can snap, and they also have to be waterproofed, and actually they grease them as well, or they can snap. And if they start to fail, you have a major structural issue, like the balconies can fall off the buildings that are being supported, this or whatever is being supported by the post tension cable can fall off, and they typically run through the slab. So they may go from one side of the building to the other through the slab. And unless you have an engineer who knows how to do testing, then you're not going to be able to know you have a problem with them until that problem starts to come alive. So next we'll do roof defects, and I am like way behind, so I'm gonna speed up. We've talked about roofs a lot. So, with roofs, you can have flat roofs, whatever kind of roof you have. If you have water standing on a flat roof, that's a bad sign. If you have any kind of leaks, that's a bad sign. A roof that's properly installed is not going to have repetitive leaks. So with that, I think we've kind of talked about that. Next would be kind of the blame game. Who's responsible? So we talked about this to some extent already. Is it the developer? Is it the design team? Is it the contractors? Is it the inspectors? Well, it's everybody's going to point to everyone else. The contractor is going to blame the design. The the designers are going to blame the contractors. The contractors are going to blame the subcontractors. The subcontractors are going to say the general contractor told me to do it that way. And that's every one of our cases. They're all trying to blame others. People will also blame the association and say, well, you guys didn't maintain it properly, even though, you may have a building that's 3, 4, 5 years old, is having significant issues, isn't due for any kind of major maintenance. They will still try to blame it on the association. It's, hey, it's everybody's fault, but mine. So, construction defect myths is the next slide. So, um, basically, and I'm just going to go to the next slide, which is repair and renovations as defects. Let's talk about that. So you can also have not just new construction that goes bad. Obviously, you can have repairs and renovations that go bad. So with all of the recent legislation, when it comes to condos, a lot of people are inspecting their buildings. There's a ton of construction going on in terms of repairing and rehabbing older buildings. We also get a lot of cases where, say, a townhome will have reserved for 20 years. It's time to replace all their roofs. They go and they get all brand new roofs, and everybody's super excited about it, and they all leak. So there can also be defects in repair and renovation projects, and we're able to help with those as well. So we see that a lot. We also, sort of other areas when you're doing repair and renovations for your associations, it's critical, really critical, that you do a good job and help guide them in terms of contractor selection. So I know that you guys are going to be getting 3 bids and you're going to get multiple bids and hopefully be working with an owner's rep or an engineer on a major project. But you want to make sure you're using companies that are reputable, companies that have the proper insurance, companies that have the proper contracts, have your general counsel look at those. Because a good contractor with good insurance and that knows what they're doing is going to be is going to be hopefully great. A bad contractor with bad insurance and not, a fly by night that's not going to be there to stand behind their work and you have any kind of problem, that can be a major, major problem for the association. I've seen associations that literally spent, $15 million on new roofs and then find out that they have to basically redo them all. And the contractor who did it is out of business and has left the state, or whatever it is. And so you don't want to be in that situation. Okay, so theories of liability and time limitations. I'm just going to go straight into the theories of liability first. So I think we talked about this a little bit, but you've got general negligence, professional negligence. That's what the claims that we bring against the architects, engineers. Contractors are not considered professionals in the state of Florida under the law, so we cannot sue contractors for professional negligence. We sue them for general negligence. You could also have products liability claims. And then beyond that, I think we already talked about you can have claims for violation of the building code. Next slide, theories of liability. There's others that we could include, which are some condominiums will have express warranties. Some single family homes might have express warranties. Typically, you don't see that express warranties for townhomes, although there could theoretically be some, but it's not typical. And then you also have statutory implied warranties. For condos, this is significant. Their condos statutes have all kinds of statutory warranties, and we would sue for breach of warranty in those cases, but that does not apply to your typical Chapter 720 association. Turnover. When is turnover? Condominium associations. So turnover is a big deal for condos because they keep changing the statute of limitations and statute of repose. And it's a big deal for 718 and 720 for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Like it's the moment where the owners actually get to take control of their own destiny. But for 718 buildings, it's really, really critical because right now the statute of repose does not begin to run until turnover has happened. There was a move in the legislature last year to try to get rid of that provision that they had put in 2 years before. But for the purposes of this presentation, the thing you need to understand about turnover for condos is that it impacts repose. So with that, I'll just go to the next slide and we will talk about repose and statute of limitations and tolling and latent defects and all those things. So in Florida, you have 4 years to bring a claim for a construction defect. However, if it is a latent defect, you have up to 7 years, and that is referred to as the statute of repose. So the 7 years is the maximum amount of time from whatever the triggering event is or the qualifying event that you would have to bring a claim. So they keep changing that triggering language in both Chapter 720 and 718, and they did it with the actual repose law, I think 3 years ago. And what they're trying to do is make it shorter. So it's really critical that if you have an association that you're working with that's approaching that 7-year mark, or even really like at the 5-year mark, that you get an engineer or call a law firm like ours and have us send an engineer to do a once over on the building before any claims expire. Because what you don't want to do is find out that you've got a 10, 20, $30 million problem or even a $2 million problem that you could have gotten the money back from the builder for after the time that your claims have expired. There's nothing I hate more than having to tell somebody, hey, if you got into us 2 years ago, we could have helped you, but now we can't. And then you're there looking at massive assessments of their owners and all that. So for the purpose of this, what you need to know is for 720, um, typical townhomes and for single family homes, you have 7 years now, basically from the date of CO, and that is with respect to each building. So if you've got a community that was built over 5 years, you're going to want, even if you just turned over a year ago, you're going to want to immediately have someone do an assessment of the buildings, of the townhomes, um, in order to make sure there's no issues prior to the running of the statute of repose. If you are a condo, you have typically a little bit more time because of, at least for now, because of the change in the law. It basically says for condos, you can't bring a claim until turnover, so we're not going to have repose run until turnover. So still, it's always when in doubt, reach out to us or, another construction defect firm, reach out to an engineer, work with your general counsel lawyers, and make sure that you are not going to let anything expire on your watch. That is absolutely critical from a CAM perspective, from a board member perspective. You want to make sure that if there's any potential claims that you have, that you don't let those expire, because obviously that is not good. If you find out, hey, I've got a huge construction defect problem, we didn't act on it quick enough, and now we've either lost the ability to bring claims as to half the buildings, or we have lost the ability to bring claims at all. So with that, we can go to the next slide, which I kind of already talked about. This is the actual law where they changed it. It used to be, so just so you guys know, it used to be 15 years. Then they lowered it to 10. Then recently they lowered it to 7. And it used to be the later of 4 triggering dates. Now they made it the earlier of the 4 triggering dates. And it's essentially pretty much the way that's written, always going to be the CO or TCO. A CO is a certificate of occupancy, meaning the building department has issued a certificate that says, okay, this structure can now be occupied. Pre-suit process, Chapter 558. So before we can file a claim, we have to send a notice to all of the contractors. It's known as a 558 notice. And this was like a dispute resolution law that was put in place by the legislature maybe 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. It was fairly new when I started, but that doesn't mean it's new anymore. The idea of it was really great, which was, hey, we want to give these contractors a chance to stay behind their work. We want them to give them a chance to do what's right. So before you're allowed to sue them for defective work, you've got to give them notice of what the problems are, and then you have to give them a certain period of time to investigate and to make an offer to come and repair. In the hundreds of cases I've handled, I've maybe seen this actually work like twice, and it's usually not where there's major issues. The reality is that the contractors, instead of doing anything in response to a 558 notice, they're just going to put their subcontractors on notice and say, hey, we're coming after you because this is your bad work. Or they're going to look to their insurance carrier or their subcontractor's insurance carrier to pay the claim, but they're not going to pay it out of pocket. So it's there, it's a requirement, it's a hoop that they make us jump through, but it typically does not work. And then the next slide, if you do get into construction defect litigation, what can you get in terms of damages? We will always be asking for the cost to repair the buildings, to make the buildings back to what they should have been if they had been built in accordance with the plans and the code. Litigation fees and costs, typically costs you can get, but like attorney's fees under Florida law and most jurisdictions in the United States, attorney's fees are not at issue unless there's a contract or a statute that says that they are. There are things we can do to put attorney's fees at issue, such as something called a proposal for settlement, which is a formal settlement offer where if you make an offer and it meets a certain form and they don't accept it within a certain time, and then you eventually go to trial, get a verdict, and beat your offer by 20%, You can get your attorney's fees from that day forward. Obviously, there's a lot of ifs in that statement that I just made. So it is not very easy to do, but you can attempt to put attorney's fees at issue as well. Um, sorry. All right. Next, getting started. It's always going to start with us with a qualified engineer, qualified um, law firm like ours. When we get a phone call and someone says, "Hey, I think I might have issues with my project," we're going to call one of the contractors, architects, or engineers that we work with, send them out to do a visual inspection of your building, of your issues. It's not going to cost you anything, and then they're going to report back to us and say, "Hey, this looks like a major problem. This looks like it could be a problem. We need to do more testing," or everything looks fine. Doesn't seem like a huge deal. So that's kind of how it starts. We'll work with you and the board, and then yeah, let's go from there. I know I'm going over, so I'm trying to go fast. Um, Next, risk management for boards and managers. So this is the most important thing as a CAM, as a board member, is manage your own risk. And how do you do that? Well, you fulfill your fiduciary obligation, of course. But how do you do that? Do use good judgment and do what the professionals tell you. Bring in professionals when you need them. So if you see cracking, don't assume that you're necessarily an engineer, or if your roofs keep leaking, and don't assume that that you can just figure it out and patch it. Bring in someone to look at it systemically and then follow their advice. The same way as if you had a legal issue, you would approach a general counsel. You're not going to ignore what the lawyer's advice is. You're going to do what they say. So again, the best way for CAMs, for board members to fulfill their responsibilities, their fiduciary obligations, is to bring in good qualified professionals that specialize in the area of whatever it is that you're doing, and then follow their professional advice. If you do that, no one can really ever question whether you've met your duty. Um, Due diligence and Maggie, I don't know, can I keep going, or is it up to them if they want to stick around?
Maybe another minute or so just to make sure we don't have any questions.
Yeah, instead of like running through the due diligence stuff, I mean, obviously that kind of goes with the fiduciary obligation.
Obligation. Yeah.
Whatever you're doing, um, understand what your role is, understand what resources are available to you. You can always call our firm if you think there's an issue. We will send someone out to look, um, and then have the assessment done. Be wary of the time limitations that we talked about, and don't let things, sit there and rot and leak and whatever. Handle things, act quickly, get an expert investigation, get legal representation, and then document as appropriate. That's really the takeaways. And now, any questions that anybody has? Okay. Well, if there are not any questions, I thank you guys very much for allowing us the opportunity to present this to you. And if you guys ever have any questions after the fact about what I talked about, or about things going on in your community, please feel free to give me a call anytime, and I'll be more than happy to speak with anyone.
And I'm gonna do a quick raffle for a $25 Starbucks gift card. So I've added everyone's name to a wheel. Let's see, let's see. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I'll read out the name. And the winner is Craig Christensen. So if you're here, I'm going to send you a $25 gift card for Starbucks. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Paul Janik. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Maggie. Everyone who attended, thank you so, so much. We will go ahead and, like I said in the very beginning, get those certificates for the CAM OPP continued education credit processed. Please give Paul Janik some ample time to get that to you. They will send it to the registered email. So the email that you use to register for the course, they will send that to you within the next 2 weeks or so. We can't thank you enough for joining us. Please keep an eye on our website for upcoming webinars. Me and Maggie are getting busy. We're going to have lots of fun webinars coming up for you guys. I'm sure you'll see Brian again. And we will go ahead and post the presentation and recording on our website for you guys to go back and visit if you need to take a peek at something you might want to revisit later on. That will be at vestapropertyservices.com/webinars. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. And thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you guys so much. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.